Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christy Nuds. I am the editor of Food in Canada, Canada's only national food and beverage processing magazine. On behalf of Food in Canada and the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology, welcome to our 2021 Table Talks webinar series, The Learning Trough, where we bring you regular webinars that explore the future of food. If you haven't already, please visit CIFST's website for a list of our upcoming webinars, which will continue every second week until June and then run again from September to November. If you are a member of CIFST, registration for the entire webinar series is free. Thank you today to Dempsey Food for their generous sponsorship of our webinar series. Today's topic is food ecosystems, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Our speaker today is John Keogh. John is a strategist, advisor, and management science researcher with 30 years of executive leadership roles as director, VP, and SVP in global supply chain management, information technology, technology consulting, and supply chain standards. John is the managing principal at the Toronto-based niche advisory and research firm Shantala Incorporated. He holds a postgraduate diploma in management, an MBA in management, and a Master of Science in Business and Management Research. He is a doctoral researcher focused on transparency and trust in food chains at Henley Business School, University of Reading, using the lenses of agency theory, signaling theory, and transactional cost theory. Welcome, John. Before we get into today's presentation, I just want to ask you a couple questions to get to know you a little bit better. So John, during COVID, did you take up baking? If so, what item is your favorite one to make?
Hi, Christy, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to the team today. And for all of you who are working in frontline food, thank you for doing what you're doing to help keep us fed. Did I take up baking? Absolutely. In fact, just in the last 2 weeks, I started doing some baking at home. And I've made a few things, vegan meatloaf, which was quite delicious, and bran muffins, and also banana bread. I think the banana bread is my favorite.
That's your favorite so far. Excellent. And we understand you have a unique surprise from your past.
Well, I have one big surprise from my past. I don't normally tell people this, but I started off my career as actually a peacekeeper. So, and with that, I was abroad on 2 occasions in the Middle East in 1981, 1983 with the United Nations peacekeeping forces. And a few years after I left the military, the United Nations peacekeeping forces were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So in my time with York Regional Police as an auxiliary officer, one of my 4 medals was proudly what we call the Nobel Peace Prize medal, and I wear that with pride.
That's incredible. Thank you, John. So before I turn it over to John, I want to mention to everyone that if you have any questions, you can write them in the question box, and I will be moderating any of these questions at the end, and John will attempt to answer them before the end of the webinar. You can also download John's PowerPoint presentation after this as well, or if you just want to send him an email. You will find it under the handout section in the GoToWebinar as well. And without further ado, please welcome John Keogh.
Thank you, Christy, for that. So you can see there my affiliation is with Henley Business School in Reading, in London. It's part of University of Reading. And the doctorate that I'm doing is actually has 50% of the cohort is actually from Toronto. It's done in collaboration with University of Toronto. So 10 of my classmates are from Toronto, and we're all almost finished right now. So what I also want to share with you is I've been collaborating with Professor Laurette Dubé from McGill University, the Center for Convergence of Health and Economics, for the past 14 months now. And she's an incredible driving force for this convergent economy. And how can we take what's happening in our health system and social systems and feed it back into, let's say, our food system, so that we can be more prescriptive and predictive with how we're producing food and bringing it to the market. And down on the left-hand side, I've also been the co-chair of their webinar series for the last year or so. And we have one coming up on March the 10th, if you want to check out their website for this. This is with one of the leading management scientists in the world, Professor Erko Autio. And we're actually going to be talking about the evolving digital ecosystems around the world, especially for food. And we're going to be talking about something in that discussion around what's called commons-based technologies. Now, you may not be familiar with that term commons-based. There's some good reads out there like The Tragedy of the Commons. But in this context, we're going to be talking about open source technologies and how they blend with, interoperate with, or not, with proprietary platforms. So that's coming up on the 10th of March. And of course, we have a panel discussion with a global retailer, solution providers, and some other experts in that as well. So what I'm going to go through today is I'm going to ground you first on transparency and trust, my pet and favorite area. Then I'll go into a few complex slides around food ecosystem complexity. Then I'll go into the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I'll make some final remarks. In my final remarks, I have one slide in my final remarks. One of the two, I'll pull together technology and I'll simplify how you can look at it for those who are not very familiar with the various technologies out there. So with that, what is supply chain transparency? So when you look at all of these products here, they could come from, every single one of these could come from a different country. They could have traveled long distances, or they could have been local. You see, there's not a lot of labeling on these products here. But as consumers, we want to know, where did our product come from? How was it processed? Was there, there's a growing need now among consumers to know if there was slave labor or child labor involved in bringing our products to the market. But is it really a supply chain anymore? And here's where I make the argument that we should be looking at this from a food ecosystem transparency perspective rather than a supply chain, because we don't have linear supply chains anymore. And let me give you an example. When I was advising at APEC, there's 21 economies within APEC, and several of the Asian economies wanted to understand the services industry. So in 2015, one of those research projects looked at bringing wine to market in Chile, one of the APEC members. And in that research, they identified 70 different services required to bring one product, wine, to market. 20 were done internally, 20 were semi-outsourced, and 30 were fully outsourced. So we need to understand the cascading consequences of a failure in any one of those services in bringing a product to the market. This is why I argue that food ecosystems is a better term rather than a supply chain. Now, when we look at the words that we have that can describe transparency, we have sincerity, fairness, honesty, believability, forthrightness. And on forthrightness, I tell organizations that if they're going on this journey to enhance transparency in their ecosystems, their global food ecosystems, that they need to be prepared for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And all three will be well catered for, I can guarantee you. Now, in some cases, organizations don't want to demonstrate the transparency in their supply chain because they may be afraid of being found guilty by association. So think of deforestation or habitat loss. It's very closely related now with the palm oil discussion that we're having in Canada. On the flip side, consumers may feel that an organization is guilty by omission by not disclosing how their global supply chain ecosystems operate. And a big part of the issue in global food ecosystems is the unobservability of what's happening. And I'll go into that in a few moments. But ultimately, this is about truth and it's about accuracy. And it's also about the declaration. If you're doing anything to the product, if you're genetically modifying it, a consumer has the right to know that. So it's about fact versus fake. It's about full disclosure. And Professor Geert Jan Hofstede, his father is very famous for the cultural studies at Geert Hofstede. Now, Geert Jan, the son, this is his definition here, transparency of a net chain, where net chain is the conflation of the network and the chain together. He talks about this in a beautiful way, and I've used this for many years. Transparency of a net chain is the extent to which all of the net chain stakeholders have a shared understanding. This is very important, a shared understanding of and access to product-related information that they request. You don't want to push information out there that's not requested or not needed, and there's many, many cases of that. And it's without loss, noise, delay, or distortion. I could spend the whole day talking about just this definition alone, but loss, noise, delay, or distortion You can imagine where that comes from. It could be a poor IT, poor interoperability. It could be noise in the system. It could be noise that are out there, signals about products being fake or illegitimate in some way. And it could be distortion in the media or in marketing. So again, it's the same with what is supply chain trust, what is food ecosystem trust is probably a better description. And again, a lot of words that we can use to describe trust. But Rousseau got together with a number of academics. There's more than 100 different definitions out there of trust. And they came up with this. It's a psychological state comprising the intention to accept a vulnerability based upon positive expectations of the intentions or behaviors of another. So what does that mean? What that means is that this family went into a restaurant. They're accepting a vulnerability because they had no say over the products. They don't know where they came from. They don't know where they were sourced from, how they were prepared. They're accepting that vulnerability, but they have a positive expectation of the intentions of behaviors of everyone in that supply chain, regardless of where the products came from. Now that's a big ask, isn't it? When you think about that, their vulnerability is huge because those products, like the vegetables in my earlier picture, they could come from all over the world, and this is a very complex picture. So consumer trust is critically important. When they do accept that vulnerability, they want safe food. Unfortunately, we can trust, but we need to verify. And this is where you guys as experts come in with your scientific knowledge to be able to verify that a food is genuine and that the food is safe. So there are two main enemies of transparency and trust in food ecosystems. And the first one is bad character, and the second is bad data. Now, on the first one, bad character, we've had this since time began with people cheating. That's impossible to eliminate. We have to plan for fraud. We have to plan for bad character. And I don't care if you're in the government or if you're in a laboratory or you're working for a food company or an NGO, there will be fraud everywhere. Bad character comes in many different shapes and forms. And the bad data, we can reduce a lot of the bad data by driving towards standards like GS1 standards, so we can reduce a lot of the bad data issues that we have related to interoperability. But when bad data is a result of collusion and organizations are what we call blockchain washing, one of the strengths of blockchain is its immutability. But when you put in bad data or you collude to put in bad data, you're creating what I call immutable lies within the system. And what are those lies that could be in the system? Fake claims like RSPO when it's not, USDA organic, halal, kosher, and we're seeing many, many cases come up now. Shocking one in Malaysia, where they've admitted that there's been halal fraud for about 40 years. We've had many kosher examples as well, and USDA organic. Now on USDA organic, that actually sends a strong signal of trust to consumers because the government is involved and they trust it. But when you have a credence claim like this, credence means that the consumer can never verify before or after purchase. So they place their trust in that label, USDA organic. So because it sends such a strong signal of trust to consumers, they are at risk of fraud. So the USDA actually publishes a list of fake USDA organic brands around the world. And this is a constant task that organizations and certification bodies have to do. And I wish more would actually publish the data as well. So well done to the USDA for publishing the lists of known bad actors in the system. But there is also hidden actions. We tend to place our trust in these labels on products, but there are hidden actions and hidden behaviors that occur in supply chains that are not well catered for. And that's like slavery, child labor, bribery, corruption, corrupt practices, deforestation, pollution, habitat loss. And they are mostly unobservable. So when I lived and researched in Malaysia and Borneo, I lived among the people there and was researching on transparency and trust. At the time I was there, the chief minister of the state was apprehended because he had received 63 million in bribes for deforestation to clear for palm oil. And there's many, many more things going on that you can't capture with a certification. This is where what we call the third-party police patrols are important. That third-party police patrols are the likes of Greenpeace organizations and others that don't have a vested interest. So food ecosystem complexity, sorry about this slide, it's busy, I know, but this is really our ecosystem. And what I'm pleading for on this slide, my most important message is we have lost the art of systems thinking, and we have lost the notion of the cascading consequences of system failures. Because we know a shock can enter the system from many, many different areas, and now we have this major shock with the pandemic. But when we want to start building resilience in our system, we have to start thinking about systems and how systems interoperate together. So we know what happened with consumers on the front end. What we saw and what we observed was panic buying, right? In Canada, we had our federal minister of health telling people to stock up, which was not the right message to do, and it was counterintuitive. However, social science advises us that when consumers, when citizens are faced with an existential threat to their very being, that there's predictable behavior in there. They will stock up anyway, and they will do utilitarian tasks like cleaning because they believe that they're contributing to the process. So in that context, we didn't make enough use of social science to understand the behavior on the front end, and we could have used that more. We should use it more in the future. So while many people were saying, look at all these panic buyers, they're selfish, in fact, there's some science that tells us that it's not always selfishness, it's also helplessness and pure survival. Now then, how did we connect the front end with the back end? We know when the systems break down in the middle, the processing factories closed, then the farmers are left with animals, let's say hogs, and the farmers keep feeding them, hoping for a better outcome. But unfortunately, the hogs would get so big, they won't even fit into the pens in the processing plants. And we know what happened right around the world with animals being euthanized, and also with milk being dumped because there was no place to send them to. Ultimately, we didn't have a food security issue per se during the pandemic, but we had a food uncertainty issue due to the lack of interoperability and visibility into our food systems. Now, this is a different cut, and I've been using this slide for maybe 12, 13 years or so. Again, look at the challenges. Look at the meal that you're going to have tonight for your lunch or even this evening. Look at what you have on the plate. Again, this chart here, this slide simplifies it, but this is a global supply chain with many, many systems, many, many countries involved, different languages, thousands of different technologies, different ways of doing things, multiple methods, differing regulations, different skill levels and of the competent authorities in each country. Very, very complex. And as you track this back, the things that I've been involved in over the years, over on the left-hand side, there's 12 or 13 precursor chemicals that make up fertilizer. Well, guess what? In some countries around the world, some of those precursor chemicals are being extracted, i.e. stolen from the supply chain to make IEDs, improvised explosive devices. And as a former military guy and former police reserve, this is something that I've kind of gravitate towards investigating, and I've worked with Interpol and World Customs on trying to identify how to mitigate the risk in those areas. So the end result is you could be getting fake fertilizer into your farms. But anyway, this is a big picture and it's complex. So when you sit down for this meal, you're wondering what species of fish is this? Is it trout? Is it salmon? Is it wild caught? Maybe you paid 30% more for wild caught salmon, but how do you prove that as a consumer? And the answer is it's impossible. So is my milk diluted or adulterated? And we know we have cases in India, we still have cases in China, and we had the melamine crisis in China. And by the way, that hasn't gone away because in 2018, December 2018, when I was living in Vietnam and working at a laboratory there, they found melamine in animal feed in Vietnam. So the problem didn't go away, it just moved commodities slightly. So is there heavy metal contamination in my food? Now, this is no surprise to many of you, I'm sure, but 3 years ago, I was in a session with the FDA who said that children under 3 years of age should not consume rice or any rice products because of the naturally occurring arsenic and the risk that they didn't have the body weight to process that. Now, if you're wondering about this in Canada, you may already have seen this program by CBC Marketplace. If not, go to their website and have a look at it, because early last year, they did a program in Vancouver with moms and babies to look at the heavy metal contamination from rice and rice products. I'm happy to see that organic fraud is being tackled, especially in the US, and there's some significant jail sentences being passed out recently. Now, as you build the picture, is my palm oil really RSPO? We know that there are illegal palm plantations feeding into RSPO. We know that RSPO took 14 years to implement the rules, and we know that the big brands are still not enforcing the deforestation rules. So there's still a lot of work to do on things like RSPO. What is the food ESG profile, the environmental, social, and governance aspects? If you weren't aware of this, just before Christmas, the CEOs of the 8 top pension funds in Canada sent out a joint letter that they're going to focus their investments on companies that have strong ESG profiles. So watch out for that. Again, in honey, we know we had Honeygate previously, and CFIA, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, made a big seizure of fake honey last year and got additional funding. So there's a lot of things here that are quite important. You may see some software providers saying that their software can do all of this, but you and I know that this is the realm of analytical science. Ultimately, we want to know, is the food safe to eat? And down at the bottom here, I'm pointing out that natural sciences are a key enabler of transparency and trust, because they provide us with that objective certainty in terms of the ascertainable and verifiable characteristics of the food products. And I'm arguing then that we can't forget the crucial role of social sciences in all of this. And recently, if any of you are interested, you could go to my YouTube channel. I did a series of interviews with scientists to focus exclusively on food provenance, the scientific methods for food provenance, and that was wildly popular. Now, on the social science, the importance of this is highly underrated. We tend to take just the natural sciences, but we have to look at phenomena through the various lenses of social science as well. So if we have food fraud, for example, we need to have the ologists around the table. The criminologists help us to understand why it happens. The psychologists help us. The sociologists, the anthropologists, all of these have very valid lenses into issues like food fraud and cheating in food systems. I was reading some research just last week about someone who ate halal meat and didn't know about it and was disgusted because that person did not, and this was research, formal academic research, the people that don't appreciate or don't value the way animals are slaughtered would have that disgust factor. The same with the horse meat scandal in Europe. Now, while horse meat is perfectly safe to eat and it's lean, it's cheaper than beef, I believe. In the UK and Ireland, they're disgusted by the notion that they were actually eating horse meat because it's culturally taboo. Again, nothing wrong with the product, it's just culturally taboo. And social science helps us to understand why that is. And now we have this Buttergate in Canada where consumers are advised, a lot of press about this, a lot of negativity in the system as well, a lot of finger pointing, but essentially, palm oil is being used in animal feed. It's not coming into the actual milk, but there are the butter, but it's coming in at the chemical level. And here's the discussions that are going on. So while this needs to be investigated and is being investigated at the analytical science level, we need to also understand the social science behind this, because consumers who are concerned about palm oil's devastating ESG profile, the deforestation, the habitat loss, and all of the proven evidence that's already out there, they may find it abhorrent if they know that the animals that produce the milk, that produce the butter or other products were being fed palm oil byproducts. So that's something, again, social science helps us to understand what's going on in that area. And of course, if there was slave labor or child labor, the social science will help us there as well. By the way, when I lived in Vietnam, child labor is not a social concern in Vietnam. They say it's just survival. Many countries in Asia are the same way. At the global, regional, national level, we can also look through the 5 pillars of the food system. So on food quality, is this what it says it is? Will this food make me sick on the food safety side? Food authenticity, is somebody trying to cheat me? Food defense, is somebody trying to kill me? And food security is, do I have enough safe, affordable, nutritious foods to meet my daily needs? Now, you may be not too familiar with food defense. I hope you are. But food defense, we don't talk about too often because we don't want to tip off the bad guys as to what's going on. But we can look horizontally and vertical. We can take milk or cheese or any product, beef, and we can take a horizontal look at this. What are the food quality issues, the food safety issues? Is there risk of food fraud? What are the food defense issues? And is there food security issues? And we can also take a horizontal, very focused view that organizations do. A lot of the larger food companies have hired ex-police officers on the food fraud and the food defense side to help beef up their defenses in those areas. So what's happening that I think is very good? Well, I think the most wonderful thing that happened over the last couple of years is the UN SDG goals, and I think it's fantastic now to see so many of the big food companies and non-food companies, plus the solution providers, articulating their key messages aligned with the SDG goals, and I think that's a fantastic development. On the sustainability and the environmental side, we're getting a much better grip on this. I think a lot of the tension has come out of the system, and we know that several sectors have made fantastic commitments to reduce their impact on the planet. I think the innovation and more choice is also great. It's kind of ironic that we in the Western developed markets are gravitating towards more plant-based proteins, whereas the less developed countries, Asia, Africa, they've always had plant-based as staples, and now they're increasing their consumption of milk, dairy broadly, and also animal-based proteins when we are reducing it. So you see that global shift in consumption happening as well. Milk consumption is going down in Western markets quite significantly, but China, India, other countries, Africa, they can't get enough milk to satisfy their needs. So I think more choice is important, and I hate to see the arguments of people saying, I'll never go into McDonald's again because now they have plant-based burgers. You know, forget about that argument. Just accept it that consumers now have more choice. Your beef burger will still be there, and the people who don't want that will have another option. And I think this is great that science is evolving so fast. And in fact, the science, the tools that you guys have right now are evolving much faster than industry's ability to prevent problems occurring in the supply chain. So now we can detect much more in food, and our food has never been safer than it is right now. AI and broadly blockchain and IoT technologies are also advancing at a very fast pace. And one of these is in Food Ekai, for example, managed out of Greece by a company called Agrano, and they're tracking 4,300 products, commodities and products daily across 170 countries. Fantastic usage of AI and machine learning to be able to pull in multiple sources. Companies can then subscribe to this, and they can look at a prediction dashboard. So if there's strife, if there's climate issues, if there's a monsoon, if there are other issues, a drought, then they can predict issues in the supply chain, whether it's fraud or quality issues. Very useful development of AI and machine learning that helps us. Now the bad, we still have too much food safety issues, and we still have too many allergens. I hate to see recalls because of allergens. It should be a never event. Unfortunately, we still have them. And these two pictures here remind me of research in late 2017 out of the UK with food and drinks manufacturers, 200 of them. 32% of them said that they cannot verify the authenticity of the ingredients that they're buying, which is shocking because the cascading consequences of bringing in fake or unsafe or ingredients that may have allergens included in them and not declared is a big issue. They put the blame squarely on retailers who are constantly driving the costs down, and they have to give up some of the things that they do in order to be efficient and meet the price points. So that's a very interesting study. If anyone's interested in that, I can share it. We still have too much fraud going on and mislabeling. This is the one on the right with Oceana, mislabeling of fish in Canada across 5 cities. The closer you get to the consumer, the more the fraud increases. I was involved in some of the oregano checks around the world. I brought oregano from 7 different countries back to Queen's University in Belfast, and it's pretty shocking. And you know, myrtle leaf is one of the adulterants, but guess what? Myrtle leaf has traditional Chinese medicine properties, so we need to look at this. Now, there was a spot check done on oregano late last year, and it is pretty much cleaned up. Now we have to go across all of the spices to clean them up. The contamination, you know about this already with leafy greens across the US, and I've mentioned already about the fake product claims. The ugly, this is important. We know that when in 2015, when the WHO came out with their first global estimates of foodborne diseases, that they pointed out that children under 5 are almost 1/3 of the deaths. So I think it was about 600 million foodborne illnesses and 420,000 deaths, with devastating economic tolls for many countries. The problem with this number, and the WHO would be the first to admit this, is this is significantly understated. Most foodborne illnesses are actually not reported, and the deaths would not be reported. So I would not be surprised if this was 1 billion foodborne illnesses and 1 million deaths per year. I wouldn't be surprised at all, and you probably wouldn't either. This is the picture in Canada. 1 in 8 people get sick, so 4 million Canadians, and 11,500 end up in hospital, and we have 240 deaths per year. In fact, just last year, not last year, pre-COVID, just pre-COVID, I did a briefing for a summer camp for all of the infectious disease specialists, and they all came to Toronto, and I talked about supply chains, I talked about all of the key issues, and they were fascinated by how we speak, the language that we talk about, and how we protect the food chain. So if you ever get an opportunity to talk to food safety, or sorry, infectious disease experts at a hospital or group of hospitals, please embrace that, because it's important. And we can learn from each other as well. You can see here that, of course, Listeria has only got 178 cases, but 35 deaths, which is significant. Now, final remarks for those of you not too familiar with the technology. Imagine using technology in a supply chain, in a food chain. So imagine yourself sitting in your car, you're driving down the highway, and you have a GPS with you. The GPS is learning from data, is pulling in from multiple sources. And it's given you what I call a tripwire, that something has happened a kilometer ahead, and it's given you a circuit breaker strategy and telling you to exit the highway. Think of that with supply chains, that AI is like looking forward and predicting what's going to happen. IoT, or Internet of Things devices, think of sensors that what is happening right now in real time. So in your car, that's like looking at all of the sensors you have in the dashboard, but also looking out your left and right mirror. Blockchain, however, is like looking in your rear view mirror. And when I say this to people, sometimes they're shocked because they think blockchain belongs up there on the top left-hand side, but it doesn't. Blockchain is a record of transactions of things that happened in your supply chain. But I put in an obstacle here. I picked this picture with an obstacle because the AI machine learning learns from the data that you capture, the historical data, and it can also point out issues that are maybe in the data that you haven't seen previously, so very valuable. So hopefully that simple analogy will help you. Finally, I would say be truth seekers always, and be cautious of truth delay, or truth decay, I should say. As Kahneman said in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, a reliable way to make people believe in falsehoods is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguishable from the truth, and a lot of people already know this. So be truth seekers, make sure that, especially in the area of food and food science, that we're improving our ability to be transparent and trusted with consumers. Don't forget that we have the natural sciences and also the social sciences. We have to look at this broadly and through different lenses. So thank you very much. Now I'll pass back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, John. Our first question is actually from the president of CIFST. She says, the trust challenge is difficult. and she has also encountered times in manufacturing where company management knows very clearly when they have been participating in fraudulent activities. And then there are times when companies, through either ignorance or negligence, have inadvertently participated in fraud because of the complex supply chain. How do we manage management attitudes?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, executives may be concerned about being guilty by association with a country or a particular supplier, or they may be found to be guilty by omission. Any firm that's not focused on transparency and enhancing trust will simply continue to have issues. If you look at, for example, the Edelman Trust Barometer from last year, from 2020, the new one is out for 2021, but for last year, they look at integrity of organizations as being critical. So you can actually then dive into the management science, and you look at transaction cost economics, for example. Firms that have higher levels of integrity actually have 10 times lower transaction cost than firms that don't have. And that high level of integrity is about being transparent and open. So if I give you two simple examples very quickly, we know that China, for example, for many reasons, is not as transparent as other countries, and they hold things close to their chest. So I'm not picking on China, but just as an example of a culture. So China is less transparent, but they're very, very efficient at building products and high quality products and bringing them to the market. Whereas Vietnam is the exact opposite. They would have a perceived higher integrity because they're more open and more transparent. They will tell you when they fail, but they don't have that ability to develop high quality products. So there you have two examples of countries that are very close together, in fact, bordering each other. In the end, what science tells us and empirical evidence tells us is the Vietnam model, where the executives are transparent, actually reduces your costs, your transaction costs tenfold versus the model that I pointed out with China, where they're only very competent at the product, but management is not as open as they could be. Now, again, that's not picking on China or Vietnam, but just two examples.
Thank you. I have a question. I think it's very fascinating. You bring social sciences into it, and I think that's something that a lot of industries haven't really considered before. And now that we've been through this pandemic experience, how can the food industry or everyone in the supply chain work with the social sciences field, or what are some steps that maybe a company or the industry itself can take to maybe make that happen?
That's a great question. I do a lot of conferences all over the world, apart from last year. And I have a really good friend, Professor John Spink from Michigan State University. And John does a lot of research on food fraud. John has a habit when he's addressing an audience anywhere in the world, he'll say, to the audience, it could be, 100 people or 1,000 people, he'll ask how many social scientists are here, and he'll probably get 1 or 2 people in the room. And then he points out that in order to address the issues in food fraud, we need to have, as I pointed out earlier, we need to have the ologists around the room to help us to understand what's going on in societies, within cultures, and why do people gravitate towards fraudulent activities. So we absolutely need the social scientists around the table. I go a step further when I'm doing workshops. I recommend to organizations to have a half day or a full day offsite, even put on criminal shirts if you want, t-shirts, but get people in that are not involved in your business and ask them to try to break your business. And they could be people from law enforcement or ex-law enforcement. It could be from IT and another company, but you're trying to figure out how can you break into the company or hack into the company. It's not just the technology side, but also the social engineering side. And think of even things like food safety culture. Food safety culture you can't work out in a laboratory. So the key to bringing safe products to the market is about behavior. And in order to understand that behavior, you need to have a solid grounding in the social sciences. So it's underpinning in everything that happens in the food industry. We just have too much of a focus on the natural sciences and not enough on the social sciences.
No, I think you're right there. And I think that's something that the industry needs to think about moving forward for sure. Okay, a couple more questions. Question number 2. When you mentioned about restaurants, this person remembers a story from her friend. He said he saw one company claim that they used 100% of some country coffee, but when he see that they poured another brand of coffee from or from another packet from another country, so it's different than the one that they claim to be using. The inspector will not inspect this because, because it's still good quality coffee. Is it really illegal to do something like that?
Well, it's cheating, right? So if you look at consumer fraud, you have the Competition Act on one hand. So you remember Breadgate, where we had the retailers and the bread producers colluding. So that wasn't food fraud per se, but it was a breach of the Canadian Competition Act for collusion. And so we can separate out those things, that it could be collusion, price fixing, and it could be, deliberate fraud, which is, could be dilution or false representation of products, false labeling. So if you're paying, $5 for premium coffee and you're getting, junk that costs maybe $2, then that is absolutely fraud. And that's it's also unethical. But a lot of this would come down to training of staff. I don't know anyone, to be honest, that goes into work in a restaurant and says, let's cheat customers today and let's make them sick. So that's never the intention of the food industry, to do these things deliberately. So they always get the benefit of the doubt that there's maybe a process issue that could be addressed. And I think if organizations use what we call the Peter Senge learning organization concepts, or even what's coming out, over the last 5 or 6 years on food safety culture, then that gets down to the behavior. What Peter Senge talks about, a learning organization, and celebrating when you find mistakes. So in that restaurant, it could have been a process error, it could have been a labeling issue, it could have been a training issue. The thing is to celebrate when you find those mistakes, even as an employee, that the management open up the opportunity for employees to be whistleblowers, even to explain when they see something going wrong, that they can bring it up to management confidently and it gets addressed. But if an organization repeats that mistake, then shame on them, because that's a decision. It's not a mistake anymore. A mistake repeated is a decision.
Thank you. I have another question from a food science educator. This person also finds that in food safety management that Hofstede cultural dynamics type models are really critical in how people act in different ways. Within our education sector, we have students from around the world coming to Canada to learn about food science, and that you and this person are of the same mind. And as food science educators, how can we better teach?
Yeah, this is a great example. I've lived all around the world, and the bulk of the last 10 years, I lived across Asia, including Malaysia, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Vietnam for the bulk of the time. So I've seen how a lot of the cultures work and operate, and it's not pretty. So when let me pick on Vietnam for a moment. In Vietnam culture, Vietnamese culture, like most of the cultures in Asia, age is very important. And in fact, based on the age, you address the person with a specific name, like the equivalent of Mr. But it can be very formal in countries like Vietnam. And the older you are, the wiser you are, so-called. So it's where maybe some countries, and developed countries, were 20, 30, 40 years ago. So some companies have found that using the term whistleblower does not work. It doesn't translate into several of these languages. So they use the terms speak up, to speak up and to address issues. But even still, what happens in a lot of these cultures is they close ranks, especially when they're dealing with a foreign buyer. They would close ranks and protect each other. That's just a normal strategy that many countries or many cultures have. So when they come to Canada for education and training, we have to help them, as it were, to understand how Canada operates, how Western cultures would operate, and how they can actually speak up when they do see that something is going wrong that could have an impact on consumers' health and safety, or could be a breach of protocol, or could be something that's just downright illegal. And I think there is an onus on us as a nation that's providing training to foreign students. And by the way, Canadian education is one of the top 3 items that the Canadian embassies work on abroad. So Vietnam, it's in the top 3, and many other countries it would be as well. So we need to help them understand how we work, how we operate, and how to speak up formally without being shy or embarrassed or figuring out that they are risking that they may get into trouble.
Interesting. Thank you, John. Well, that's it for, oh, I think one more person is writing a question. So John, can you just expand upon the use of technology? Like it isn't perfect, it's not a panacea, but how can food companies use this, or what are the pitfalls, I guess?
Well, if you look at the modern technologies, I would recommend that all organizations have a sandbox where they can test out and prove out the applicability. Blockchain is not necessarily for everyone. You don't need blockchain to do traceability. You don't need blockchain to do recall. However, it does have some inherent capabilities that looks like at this point, based on my research and writings and what I'm seeing in use cases, it will be a fundamental part of society, whether we like it or not. It brings that added transparency, and it also enhances trust. So there are ways where you can use that. The key here is not depending on one particular technology, but how does it all blend together? As I pointed out earlier in my analogy of the car, blockchain is for historical transactions. And you can call that also, as Hofstede calls it, history-based transparency, what happened in the supply chain. But when you get up to operational level transparency, that's when you need IoT. And when you get up to strategic transparency, where you're sharing information on your market, on the growth with your business partners, your ecosystem partners, that's when you need to start using tools like AI and machine learning that the whole ecosystem that you've built can benefit from. So I would say to get a sandbox, start to develop. Luckily enough that there's enough projects going on out there where we can learn from those projects as well. And Walmart Canada has done a recent project, and there's a write-up. In fact, it was just posted earlier this week from University of Arkansas. They posted this use case of blockchain being used to reduce the amount of friction in transactions between Walmart and their trading partners. And I believe it's gotten significant benefits and eliminated a significant amount of friction between companies because of issues with the transactions. So look for the spot for the technology, do a proof of concept, pilot, and don't be afraid to roll it out. If you're hearing all of this, a lot of negative stuff about blockchain, don't worry about that. That's more related to Bitcoin and the fact that we still don't know who created Bitcoin. It could be a criminal organization, it could be a government, it could be a bank, it could be an individual. But Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym. We don't know who created Bitcoin, and until we get some answers to that, there will always be a cloud hanging over this. Is it a business risk for us? But separate from that, blockchain is not going away, and it'll be just used more and more often. But use it with tools like IoT devices and AI and machine learning for the best benefit.
Great, thank you, John, for that clarification. I have a great question that came in. and one that I was going to ask you anyway as well. How do we bridge the consumer education gap when there is so much bad data being distributed through social media? There is a large portion of our population that has little to no idea on how their food is actually produced, and when industry tries to educate with real scientific data, it is sometimes disregarded because of false assumptions based on bad data.
Yeah, so I write about this a lot, and I've also been in the media actually talking about this as well, especially with COVID. And I'm going to point to what we call signaling theory. Now, signaling theory is about communication, and signaling theory helps us reduce the information asymmetry between two parties, and that's between food producers or an association and their consumers. So one party has more information than the other, and how do you bridge that gap and share that information so that it's well understood? So in signaling theory, you have a signaler, you have the signal, you have the signal receiver, and the signal receiver operates within an environment where there's a lot of noise, like conflicting messages within social media. The key to all of this is to get the feedback back into the signaler so the signaler can adjust the message, and that's not happening good enough. It's not happening now with the issue around Buttergate. It's not happening it wasn't happening with COVID. So let me give an example of very bad signaling. When you have politicians and public health officials shoulder to shoulder on stage, yet they're signaling to us that we need to be 6 feet apart. So that would be bad signaling, and they need to get the feedback that what they're doing is really stupid. So we need to be consistent and coherent in the messaging. I would recommend signaling theory. If anyone is interested in that, send me a note either on LinkedIn or otherwise, and I'll send you some of the stuff that I've written on this and how organizations can use it. Many people will naturally know this, but will not know signaling theory as a term or a science and how it can be applied, but it's used every day. The key to this, signaler, the signaler, the signal receiver, noise, signal is not getting across, the feedback loop is critical, and you adjust your signal. That's really what it's about, and I don't see that adjusting of the signal happening.
Great, thank you, John. That's a great explanation. Well, we have run out of time, but if anyone does have any additional questions, as John indicated, you can reach him on LinkedIn, and his presentation is always also available in the handout on GoToWebinar, which also contains his email address. So John, on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology and Food in Canada magazine, thank you so much for your informative presentation today. A reminder to everyone that we are hosting webinars every second Wednesday until June, and then again from September to November. Our next webinar is going to be on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, and will feature Kevin Elder of Food Processing Skills Canada, and he's going to take us through the findings of a very recent food processing skills labor market information report. And registration is now open on our website. Thank you for attending, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You offline?
Usually it stops, so you can exit if you'd like. I think that'd be okay.